Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about three of the worst NBA teams of all time, and it's three teams that happen to all be playing right now in this current season. Going into the year, I thought there weren't really going to be any terrible teams in the NBA. Even the rebuilding teams I felt like had some fun young talent that could lead them to taking a bit of a jump, that could make them somewhat competitive on a night-to-night basis. No, not for these three teams in particular. The three squads are the Washington Wizards, the San Antonio Spurs, and the Detroit Pistons. These three teams currently have a combined record of 8-59, which is less than half of the wins of the Minnesota Timberwolves alone right now. And in their last 52 games, these three teams are a combined 1-51. The only reason they have a win amongst the three of them is because the Wizards and Pistons played each other over this stretch. So physically, one of them had to win. But even going into the game, I wasn't sure we were going to see a team win. I thought somehow they'd find a way to have the first tie in NBA history of both get losses. That's how bad these three squads have been so far this season. They're not just bad right now, they're historically bad. All three of these teams are on pace for bottom 5 seasons of all time in terms of win percentage. It's been a disaster. So today I want to talk a bit about each of these teams, what's been so bad about them, and my concern level, going from, oh, I'm not really worried, to you need to hit the panic button immediately. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Let's talk about these bad teams. First, let's talk about the team I have the least concerns about, and that's the San Antonio Spurs. Last night, they lost to the Houston Rockets 93-82, 11-point loss, which isn't that bad, all things considered, playing a pretty good Rockets team. You held them to below 100 points. Now you did score just 82 of your own, which has been a problem for the Spurs all season. The offense is basically non-existent, and this loss pushes them to a franchise record 18-game losing streak. They're 3-19 on the season, and currently on pace for 11 wins, which would be tied for the 5th worst record in NBA history. They've been terrible, but at the same time, I'm not super concerned, mainly because they do have Victor Wembanyama, a guy that I still believe is a generational player. He's going to be an all-time level talent, and he's shown a lot of promise despite being in one of the worst positions a number 1 overall pick could possibly be in at this point. Last night against the Rockets, he had 15 points, 8 boards, 3 assists, and 5 blocks, including a big-time poster on Şengün. He's having a great season, all things considered, statistically putting up 18.8 points per game, 10.6 boards, 2.6 assists, 1.2 steals, and 2.8 blocks, which feels like it's one of the top block numbers we've ever seen from a rookie. I didn't do research before this, but it feels substantial. The shooting percentages aren't great, 43% from the field and 25% from deep, but the 3 ball was always going to be something that Vic had to work on, and I think that field goal percentage will come up a lot as the talent around him gets better. They can't just focus on Vic, especially when they get some guard play, which has been the big issue for the Spurs all season. They've started Jeremy Sohan as the lead guard a lot of the year, which he's had some moments here and there, but for the most part, it's been kind of a disaster. He's just not a lead ball handler in the NBA. I think he could be great as a 4, but the 1 is not his role. Trey Jones has been better in that regard, but they haven't put him at that position very often, mainly because I think they're intentionally tanking by trying some of this stuff, and just in general, not a lot of great ball handlers. It feels like nobody on the Spurs knows how to make an entry pass to Vic. So when he gets better talent around him, I think he's going to skyrocket in terms of his statistical production, in terms of his efficiency. I think this is very clearly a baseline for Vic that he's never going to get close to again. He's a special talent, especially on the defensive end, where even though the Spurs defense as a whole has been bad this season, he's been special. Again, 2.8 blocks. He's deterring guys from even trying to shoot. Unlike almost anything I've ever seen, there'll be 3-point shooters that are like wide open, like 10, 15 feet away from Vic, it feels like, and they'll still hesitate because he's got so much length and he makes these impossible blocks that he consistently forces you to think about your shot for a moment, which in and of itself is great defense. And that combined with just his ability to get in passing lanes, his great use of his hands, Vic is going to be a multi-time decoy. He's already in all defensive conversations as a rookie, despite how bad this Spurs team has been defensively. Vic is special, and that's a big reason why I'm not super concerned about the Spurs, and ultimately, losing a lot of games is good for this team. They need a top pick. They need to bring in more talent next to Vic, maybe like an Isaiah Collier. I don't know a lot about this draft yet. I haven't watched much college basketball, to be honest. I usually do later on in the year because right now I'm very focused on the NBA. So as that goes on, I'm sure more prospects will make themselves known, but Collier is one name that I know as a pretty good guard, so maybe a guy like him could come in and help Victor Wembanyama out a lot. And I also could just see them trying to make some trades in the offseason to get Vic more talent. They've got some salary they can move off of. They have some draft picks. I wouldn't be surprised if this season is just, hey, let's go ahead and try and get another top talent next to Vic, and next offseason and beyond, we'll really try to build this thing up, because with how good I think Vic's going to be, the Spurs don't have a lot of time to go out and get him a top running mate in the draft, so this is their best opportunity. They're using this season to learn about Vic, figure out his strengths and his weaknesses. He's using it as a time to figure out what he needs to do in the future. I think the Spurs are going to be perfectly fine, even if this is a historic historically bad season for the franchise. I also like Devin Vassell's game a lot. I think he's going to be really good for a while. Keldon Johnson's fun. There's been some fun moments from some of the other young players on this team. All around, I think the Spurs are going to be fine. It's just going to take time. It's their first year of the rebuild, not the end of the world. Second up on my panic scale are the Washington Wizards. Like the Spurs, I'm not super concerned about them, but a little more concerned than I was with San Antonio. Last night, the Wizards lose to the Sixers 146-101, a 45-point loss. Feels like the Sixers just love bullying the Wizards for some reason. Embiid constantly torches them for 40-point, 50-point games. Last night, he had 34, 11, and 5. Max had 24 and 6. And with this loss, the Wizards have lost 5 straight. They're 3-19 like the Spurs, also on pace for 11 wins, which again would be the 5th worst record of all time. And the only win they've gotten since November 8th was against the Detroit Pistons. So if they didn't have that on their schedule, there's a good chance they're also on a franchise record, I think, losing streak with this current stretch they're on. But again, not super concerned. Kuzma has been great this season. He could either get them a trade haul or he could be a good piece going forward. It seems like he likes being in Washington, so maybe they keep him in town. But if they decide to move off from him, I think he could be one of the more intriguing pieces at the deadline. Could get them maybe a young player, some draft picks, more stuff to build up their rebuild because, like the Spurs, this is the first year of their process. They're going through it. They're trying to figure out, okay, who's here for the future? Who do we need to trade off and get value from? I think there's a couple more guys that they could deal like Kuzma, for example, Tyus Jones, Daniel Gafford, amongst others. So I think they could find a way to bring in more assets while continuing this tank and ending up getting a top pick, which, like for the Spurs, should be the goal of the Wizards at this point. They've got some fun young talent, but don't have like that guy quite yet. Although I will say with Bilal Coulibaly, I think he's going to be really, really good. He's putting up a little bit under 10 points per game, but he's shooting 52% from the field, 40% from three, way more efficient than I was expecting in the early going of his career. He's also putting up a steal per game. His defense has been really impressive. For someone who's just 19 years old, I thought he was going to be a bit more raw than this coming into the league, but he has it. And I was a big believer in Bilal coming into the draft. He was one of my favorite guys for the Thunder to draft. And so far, I've loved what I've seen from him in Washington. I think he's going to be a special player. I think Corey Kispert could be a good solid role player for the future. Denny Avdia's having a really solid season for himself. So there's some fun young talent going on over there in Washington. They've got some pieces that they could trade for more assets. So all around, I think they're not in the worst spot possible. But I will say the big thing that is concerning for me is Jordan Poole. When they picked him up from the Golden State Warriors, I thought he could end up becoming a star in his new role, maybe a future all-star caliber player, a piece for them to build around. But so far, he's been one of the worst players in the league. According to EPM, which is an advanced stat that estimates your value on both ends, he's the 5th worst player in the NBA that plays at least 20 minutes per game. It's not exactly what you want to see from a guy who's supposed to be your budding star. Now, he is still young. He's just 24 years old, but he's putting up 16.7 points per game, the lowest total for him in 3 years. He's shooting 40% from the field, his lowest mark since 2021, 29.5% from deep, which is his lowest since his rookie season, where he was statistically the worst player in the league, 3.3 assists per game, which is the lowest since his sophomore season, 2.9 turnovers per game, the most of his career outside of last season. So he's having the worst season in most of his statistical categories, are very close to it when you combine across the board. This is the most disappointing year of his career, and he's doing all this while playing roughly the same amount of minutes as he did last season and shooting just half a shot less than he did with the Warriors in 2022. He's playing big minutes for this team and has been a liability on both ends of the court in that runtime. It's been really disappointing. I was buying a lot of stock in Jordan Poole. I thought he could go out there, get a ton of opportunity with the green light and show, hey, the Warriors made a mistake trading me at such a young age, and I can still be that future all-star that people felt like I could be coming off that Warriors title run. But instead, it feels like he's just got an albatross of a contract. He might just be a fun player off the bench, but never really a good starter, never an all-star caliber player. I've just been very disappointed. Maybe as the Wizards get more talent, or if he gets traded to another situation, he could be better. But that also brings me to the fact that I don't know how the Wizards get off of his contract. He's currently making $27 million by the end of his contract, which is in 4 years. He'll be making $34 million. So how do you move off of this money when he's being one of the worst players in the league on both ends consistently? Like, how are you able to sell a team on this young player with potential when he isn't showing it really ever out there on the court? They could have theoretically dealt him even if they didn't see him as a future piece if he was playing well, but he's not. They're just gonna have to wait, I guess, to see if he reestablishes value, and if he doesn't, they're gonna have to probably just hold on to that contract until he can at some point show some type of promise, or maybe the contract gets towards expiring, they're able to make a team take it on with some draft capital. But it's been a disaster of an acquisition so far, which is really, really disappointing. Outside of that, though, they'll end up sucking the rest of the season. They'll get a top 5 pick. Maybe it could be their superstar for the future. Maybe it is Bilal, who I think, again, is going to be really good. But right now, they're just trying to tank for this first season, find a top player, and help give them some direction. Overall, not super concerned about the Wizards, although I think things could be going better than they are. But this brings us to the worst team in the league so far, and the team that I'm by far the most concerned about in the Detroit Pistons. Last night, they lose to the Indiana Pacers by 8 points, and it pushes them to 2-21. They're currently on a 20-game losing streak. That's tied for the 9th longest streak in NBA history, and it's the longest single-season streak in Pistons history. I made a video talking about how the Magic were on the rise and the Pistons were, again, really bad, and the correlation between those two teams who were both rebuilding coming into the year. I made that video like 2-3 weeks ago. The Pistons haven't won a game since then. I thought that video was going to be kind of the last time I talked about the Pistons, that they would find some way to win. They haven't. They had a no-win November. They didn't win a single game in the month of November, and I'm looking at their schedule for December, the rest of the calendar year. I'm not sure they're going to win again until the new year, which if they didn't, they would go ahead and, on that last game of December, break the record for the worst losing streak in NBA history. To be honest, the more that I watch this team, I think they're going to get to that point, and if they don't, they're going to get very, very close, which is insane for a team that started the season 2-1. Like, the first 3 games were promising. They got a couple of wins, beating teams that I felt like they probably should beat. They lost very closely to the Miami Heat in their first game, I believe, of the season, who were the reigning Eastern Conference champs. So it looked very promising for the Detroit Pistons. And since then, it's been nothing but disaster. This was supposed to be a big year for them. Cade Cunningham was returning. I felt like he was poised for an all-star type campaign after hardly playing last season. I think he was the favorite for MIP, or one of the top contenders coming into the season. Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey had great rookie seasons. Felt like they were steals in the draft where the Pistons got them. Felt like they could build off of those rookie seasons in a big way. Asar Thompson was a super fun pairing with the group. Looked great in summer league, looked great in preseason. Thought he was going to be a lot of fun. They still had Bojan Bogdanovic, who was a 20-point per game scorer last season. They brought in Joe Harris as a shooter. They brought in Monty Williams, a new head coach who had years and years of winning with the Phoenix Suns. And it felt like he could come in and shift the culture. And instead, I guess he has shifted the culture, but it's become worse. I have been extremely disappointed. I didn't think they were going to be a play-in team. I thought they were still maybe a year away, but I thought they'd be infinitely better than the 17-win team that they were last season. Instead, they're on pace for the worst record in NBA history. Right now, they're on pace for 7 wins. A record of 7-75 doesn't even feel like it should be possible. It feels like you should have to purposefully sit all your guys to even get to that point in the NBA with how unpredictable it is. 7 wins would be the same number of wins that the Charlotte Bobcats got, who currently hold the record for worst season ever. But the Bobcats got their 7 wins in a season that was only 66 games long. It was shortened by the lockout. The Pistons might get 7 wins in an 82-game season, 16 games longer than that Bobcats year. They're not just bad, they are all-time bad. They may end up being the worst NBA team of all time. And when I watch them, it certainly feels like that. They're just not competent in really any area of the game at this point. And it'd be a lot easier to stomach if this was year 1 of the rebuild like it was for the Wizards, or just the beginning like it was for the Spurs, and they were all out tanking. But instead, they're coming into year 5. This is the 5th year of their rebuild. Cade Cunningham was drafted first overall a few years ago, back in 2021. And since that moment, they've won 60 games in 3 seasons. The last time they made the playoffs was 2019, and they only went 500 in that season. The last time they went over 500 was 2015-16, 8 years ago. They've been in a constant cycle of losing and losing and losing, and somehow they've won up themselves by regressing from a 17-win team last season. Despite Cade Cunningham returning, getting a new coach, making these acquisitions, it should be impossible, but it's happening right now. And I truly don't know where the light is at the end of the tunnel. Like, Cade was supposed to be the guy that saved them, and he's doing his best, putting up 22, 4, and 7, but he's shooting just 42% from the field, 34% from deep, 4.3 turnovers a game. I do think a lot of that is the situation. He's in a really bad spot. There's awful spacing on this team, and just not a lot of talent around him. But the more that I watch Cade, part of me is questioning if he can be their number 1 guy, or if they need to find someone else and he's more of a 2 option. They've given him a lot of offensive responsibilities. I haven't liked his decision making or his execution in a lot of those moments. Again, it could be way different if he gets an actual good supporting cast, but I haven't been super encouraged. I still think he could be really good in an all-star. I just don't know if he can be the number 1 on this team getting back to trying to be a championship contender. Jaden Ivey was their top pick in last year's draft, the guy that they won like 21 games or something like that for, and he's been relegated to the bench. He hardly ever starts and is often one of the last guys in the rotation to check in. There have been multiple games where he's the 11th man coming in, and thankfully he has been playing more lately, but I feel like for most of the season, it's just been constant inconsistency for him, whether it's in terms of minutes, in terms of role. It just doesn't feel like his development is a priority at all despite how fun he was last season and how really solid he's been so far this year. Like, he's having a good season when he actually gets minutes, but he doesn't get them very often. If you're going to be bad, at least prioritize the development of your young guys. Same thing for Asar Thompson, who's been one of the biggest bright spots for them this year. He can't hit a three for anything, but he looks like a future maybe depoy type wing, at the very least all defensive type wing. He already feels like that right now in his rookie season, but his minutes have been down over the last 5 games before this one. He's been coming off the bench recently. It just feels like Monty Williams, who I've been very unimpressed with, doesn't know what to do. Does he try to find a way to win games? Does he just ride with the young pieces, which I think is what they should do, because if you're going to be bad, at the very least, give your young talent some type of consistent role, help them produce, figure out where they are in the league and what they need to work on, instead of consistently changing things and having them have to guess how many minutes they're going to get per night. Honestly, I've just been completely unimpressed by everything Monty Williams has done since getting to Detroit. I thought he was a pretty good coach in Phoenix when he and the Suns split ways. It made sense to me. Felt like they were going in different directions, but I still felt like he had the opportunity to give a team a lot. And when the Pistons picked him up, I'm like, boom, I love this. He can bring the winning mentality from Phoenix over to Detroit, finally help them get back to the winning ways. And again, instead, they've been worse than they were last season. His rotations don't make a lot of sense. There are certain players it just seems like he has biases against. Jaden Ivey is one in particular. I don't understand a lot of the lineup changes he makes from game to game. And there are some post-game press conference moments where I am just completely in shock. Like, he says things that feel like it's obvious to everybody but him. I don't know. I still have hope for Monty Williams because, again, I thought he was a pretty good coach leaving Phoenix. But so far in this new situation in Detroit, it feels like he's like, oh, this is way worse than I was expecting. And at times he kind of just seems checked out. With the way that things are going, the Pistons are probably going to end up with another top 5 pick. But at this point, is that really going to even do anything? Like, they've had so many top picks between Cade and Killian Hayes and Jaden Ivey. Jalen Duren was a lottery pick. Like, they've had so many selections. They just haven't been able to make anything happen. So is this the point where they go out there and try and trade for an established player? Like, I know Zach LaVine was a rumor guy for them, maybe someone else out there in the market, but are one of those guys really going to fix their problems? It feels like this whole roster needs an overhaul, which is not what you want to say year 5 into your rebuild. It's just a complete mess. Now, do I think they're going to go ahead and win just 7 games like they're on track to right now? No. I think eventually they'll turn it up a little bit more. They have looked better as of late. They had a 6-point loss to the Knicks, a 9-point loss to the Cavs, and then this 8-point loss to the Pacers. All decently close games against some pretty good teams. Bojan has helped out with the spacing. I feel like as he kind of gets back more to himself after his injury time, I think eventually the Pistons will rack up a couple wins here and there, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 10, 12, 15, maybe even up to 20 wins at like the most. But even that is incredibly disappointing after coming off last season, unless they somehow go on a miraculous run and rack up like 30 wins, which feels impossible at this point. I think this year goes down as a massive disappointment, the first one of the Monty Williams era. You really don't know what direction to go. You've got some hard decisions to make about, do you try and trade for an established player to help Cade? Is Cade your guy going forward? What pieces stay on this team going into next season? I don't know. It's been really rough over there for the Detroit Pistons. We'll see if they can continue this seemingly positive growth that they've displayed over the past few games. Fingers crossed, because I really want Pistons fans to find some type of success. There's a promo that the Pistons have been doing with Wingstop this season where every time the Pistons win, there's like 8 free wings that you can get. Pistons fans haven't had wings in over a month at this point. The last Pistons game, fans were wearing bags on their heads. I haven't seen that since like the Process Sixers 6-7 years ago. That's how bad it's gotten in Detroit right now. There are 3 really bad teams, and the Pistons only have 1 less win than the Wizards and the Spurs, but because of their situation, the Pistons are in a much worse spot, and I'm way more panicky about them than either of those teams, probably even combined. So yeah, with all that being said, those are my thoughts on these 3 really bad teams. Let me know what you think about each of them. Who are you most worried about? Do you think the Pistons are going to be okay? Like, what moves should they make to try and turn things around? Who should the Spurs go after as a running mate for Wemby? For the Wizards, what do they do about Jordan Poole? Should they trade or keep Kyle Kuzma as a piece going forward? Try and flip him for some assets. Same with like Tyus Jones, Daniel Gafford. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know we talk a lot about the good teams on this channel, but I thought we'd go ahead and discuss some of the bottom feeders in the NBA. If there's any other teams you want to see me break down, let me know down below in the comments. As always, would love if you left a like and subscribed. Helps the channel out a ton. But for right now, appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say back.